March 24th, 1989, the anniversary of the Exxon Valdez, the disaster in Alaska. And then just yesterday, the 30th anniversary, 1979, of 3 Mile Island. What do we have to learn from these crises, these catastrophes, and how relevant they are to today, and how much larger than just the accidents themselves we can draw lessons. I wrote my column this week called Lessons of the Exxon Valdez, based on a conversation I had with Ricky Ott. Some of you might have heard her. How many of you listen to or watch Democracy Now? Well, it's wonderful to see, and you can, of course, catch us here on local media, on Scan, on KSER, on KBCS, at democracynow.org. We video and audio podcast, and on television, satellite television, on Dish Network, channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and DirecTV, channel 375. But it is amazing to learn from people on the ground, and that is the philosophy of Democracy Now!, to break the sound barrier, not with that small circle of pundits we get on all the networks every day, who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. But people in your own communities who are doing the remarkable work and giving them a global airing. The problems are too big right now to hear the kind of narrow solutions that are repeated over and over again. We need people who think outside the box. Think of your TV box. Outside of that, there is too much at stake, and you cannot break the sound barrier with an 8-second soundbite. The only thing you can say in that amount of time is what everyone else says, because that's how everyone else, Saddam Hussein was like Hitler, and everyone knows 4 seconds, you're ready for prime time. But if you have something else to say, that the Bush administration was guilty of war crimes, well, that actually took less than 8 seconds. But you sound a little crazy unless you can explain the Nuremberg principles. What are the Geneva Conventions? What does this mean? What are war crimes? What do they mean? If you don't have time to explain them, then even if you can speak within that constrained amount of time, you're marginalized. But in order to change the direction of that single-hold oil tanker, it takes more. It takes time to hear someone critically think, especially important for young people. I always say for young people, but maybe it's even more important for older people who are set in a way of thinking, who are conditioned to think a certain way. How are people thinking really outside the box? Ricky Ott is one of them. Ricky Ott, who calls herself a fisherman. Yes, this week marks the Exxon Valdez supertanker spilling at least 11 million, it may be several times larger than that, gallons of oil into Alaska's pristine Prince William Sound. The consequences of the spill, epic, continuing to this day, impacting the environment and the economy. But instead of seeing it just as a pollution story, Ricky Ott considers the Exxon Valdez disaster to be a fundamental threat to U.S. democracy. Ott's a marine toxicologist, commercial salmon fisherman from Cordova, Alaska, opening her book called Not One Drop with the words of Albert Einstein. Remember this quote: "No problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it." No problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. The massive spill in Alaska stretched 1,200 miles and covered 3,200 miles of shoreline, an incredible 10,000 square miles overall. Early on March 24th, 89, Ott, who was on the board of the Cordova District Fishermen United, was airborne. She was surveying the scene. She said it was surreal. It was just drop-dead gorgeous. March, sunrise, pink mountains glistening with the sunrise, and all of a sudden we come on the scene where there's this red deck of this oil tanker that's 3 football fields long, flat, calm water, dark blue, and there's this inky black stain that's just stretching with the tide. News of the spill went global. People poured into Valdez to start the cleanup. Sea life was devastated. Ott says up to 500,000 seabirds died, along with 5,000 sea otters, 300 or so harp seals, billions of young salmon fish eggs and young juvenile fish. The death of the fish eggs, a metaphor for the future. created a long-term but delayed impact on the herring and salmon fisheries in Prince William Sound. By 93, the fisheries had collapsed. Families lost their livelihoods after taking huge loans to buy boats and expensive fishing permits. The salmon fishery has improved. The herring have never come back. This economic disruption is one basis of legal action against ExxonMobil, the biggest oil corporation in the world. Complex litigation has dragged on for 2 decades, but ExxonMobil is winning. There are 22,000 plaintiffs suing ExxonMobil. A jury awarded the plaintiffs $5 billion in damages, equal to what was at the time a year's worth of Exxon profits. But this was cut by half by a U.S. appeals court, then finally lowered to just $500 million by the Supreme Court. During the 2 decades of court battles, 6,000 of the original plaintiffs have died. ExxonMobil, with its billions in annual profits and armies of lawyers, can tie up the Valdez case in the courts for decades, while the injured commercial fishers slowly die off. The power of ExxonMobil to battle tens of thousands of citizens has pushed Rickiott to join a growing number of activists who want to put corporations back in their place by stripping them of their legal status as persons. A 19th century U.S. Supreme Court decision gave corporations the same status as people with access to the protections of the Bill of Rights. Ironically, this comes from the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, adopted to protect freed slaves from oppressive state laws after the Civil War. Corporations were historically chartered by states to conduct their business. States could revoke a corporation's charter if it breaks the law or acts beyond its charter. Corporations' free speech is interpreted to include making campaign contributions and lobbying Congress. People who break laws can be locked up. When a corporation breaks the law, even behaving criminally, negligently, causing death, rarely are the consequences greater than a fine which the corporation can write off on its taxes. As Ott put it, if 3 strikes and you're outlaws can put a person in prison for life, why not a corporation? So-called tort reform in U.S. law is eroding an individual's ability to sue corporations and the ability for courts to assess damages that would actually deter